Hello again. Welcome back to round two. It's much later in the day, and as promised, I'm going to give you guys the 16 movies plus a documentary series that I watched in April. And once I get later in this list, you'll be thinking, what is this guy on? I'll explain. So, I have some new releases, lots of rewatches, especially for my childhood. Again, I'll elaborate on that. And some horror and other stuff. So, like I said, I had a total of 16 movies plus a documentary special. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the first movie I watched. And that is American Psycho. And this was the first video that I did in April, because I did like a book versus movie on this. And this movie doesn't really follow the book to a T, because you simply cannot do that. The book is a lot more graphic, but this movie just feels more tame. So again, this is about Patrick Bateman. He is a successful Wall Street broker by day, but by night he is a sadistic serial killer who hunts call girls and hookers. And this dude is a nihilistic. I swear they're not after me. That was like sirens in the background, but don't worry about that. But anyway, he just like lives his day job, and then he just completely snaps when the night comes. So, very messed up story, but it's definitely a very important horror property. So that was American Psycho. And guess what? I don't have to talk about this anymore. So moving on, the next movie I watched is the first new release I watched, The First Omen. And this is a prequel to the original Omen. And it takes place in 1971. And it's about like this woman who is about ready to become a nun. And she's taken in to this convent. And the convent has sinister aspirations to birth the Antichrist. Now, I know a lot of people have been comparing this to Immaculate. Both of them are very similar movies, but this one is more gruesome. There are some very graphic childbirth scenes in this movie, especially the hand coming out of the girl's woo-woo. So, they try to slap an NC-17 on this movie, but they got it down to R. But this movie is very unsettling, and you already know the twist where Damien Thorne is born, and the Thorns adopt him, and that's when you come into the Omen. So I think this works very well with a double feature where you can watch this and watch the original Omen and not be confused. So it was a pretty solid movie. Again, I have a review on the channel. Check it out. So the next movie I watched was the day after I saw the first Omen. Monkey Man. Much different movie. But this is a revenge thriller that has aspirations of John Wick, but it takes place in India. So Dev Patel is the star of this movie, and it is his directorial debut as well. This movie's weird. So it essentially has Dev Patel being like a cage fighter, and he just like wears this monkey mask. And there is also like a revenge plot in this movie as well. So I thought it was just okay. It could have been better. But there is another movie on this list that I think is a little bit better than Monkey Man. And that movie has similar aspects to it. But continuing on, the next movie I watched was Bill and Ted Face the Music. So I rewatched the first two at the end of March, and I decided to throw on the third one here for the very first time. And the third one was released in the worst year of our lives, 2020. And this movie was nowhere to be seen. But this is a legacy sequel that reunites Bill and Ted, and now they have daughters, and they team up to save the world from crumbling with time. That's all I remember, and time just like collapses on the world. Very different, but that's Bill and Ted. It's supposed to be a sci-fi comedy. But that's all I got to say about Bill and Ted Face the Music. Let me get this a little bit closer here. Yeah, that way you can see it. But moving on, I have the next movie, Civil War. And this is a movie about a dystopian America that is in the middle of a modern day civil war. Hence, Civil War. So there are different sorts of factions throughout America that are against each other, and these combat photojournalists are on the front line covering all of these atrocities. This movie had a very cool premise, but people thought it was way too political. And I gotta say, there are underlinings to the political aspect of this movie, because this is just about like trying to survive in this society. And this has a very dark premise. I mean, there are some very disturbing images in this movie, but this movie actually like really worked for me. And everybody talks about Jesse Plemons in this movie. He's not even in this movie like no longer than 10 minutes. But I really did enjoy this movie. I have a review on it, so If you're interested, check it out. But moving on, the next movie I watched was Sting. And this movie released the same weekend as Civil War. And this is a creature feature that deals with like an alien spider that traps people in an apartment complex. This is the definition of a B horror movie. So essentially, every time Sting gets fed, he gets bigger and bigger. I really did enjoy this movie. Is it Jaws? No. But it definitely gets under your skin if you're an arachnophobic. Which, I mean, I love creature features, and this movie definitely worked out. But that was Sting. Okay, we're good. But, moving on, the next movie I watched was a Shudder original, Slacks. This was probably my least favorite movie that I watched this month. This was basically about like a pair of possessed genes. It was stupid. So I pretty much like watched my phone more than I watched this movie. So I don't have much else to say about Slacks. But moving on, that documentary series that I watched, and I binged this all in one day. Quiet on Set, The Dark Side of Kids TV. And this was on Investigation Discovery, and I really wanted to talk about this documentary series. Woo. But this is all about like the allegations of child abuse and pedophilia at Nickelodeon. And this pretty much all occurred with Dan Schneider, Brian Peck, and Jason Handy. So this docuseries just like went into very dark, depressing subject matter, and all of these kids were like no more than 6 to 12 years old, and I felt sickened watching this. But when they had that whole episode about Drake Bell, I was like, God. But Drake Bell was molested, allegedly, by Brian Peck, and he worked as like a dialogue coach on The Amanda Show. So, very dark stuff, but very fascinating. And Dan Schneider was kinda flirty with all the women here. I mean, there was like a scene in here where I think the actress name was Alexa Nichols or something. And she was on Zoe 101. She was like the best friend towards Jamie Lynn Spears. Well, they showed like an episode where they were like trying to like get like a lid off of this tube, and they were kind of, and then it ended up kind of like being like cum shot. Ugh. So, it was definitely very hard working environments with Nickelodeon, but it's very sick, and you just feel violated after like watching all this stuff. But also, not to mention, Jeanette McCurdy was one of the victims, if you will. She wrote a book about her life, and I'm actually gonna like listen to it here in May. It's called "I'm Glad My Mom Died," and she literally mentions the creator, and she's literally calling out Dan Schneider. So she was also on iCarly and Sam and Cat, which also brings me into another unfortunate thing that happened during Sam and Cat. Ariana Grande was kind of like doing like a live stream, if you will, and it almost kind of looked like a cam site. Ariana Grande at that time had to have been at least like 15 or 16. It was kind of sick. But not to mention, Dan Schneider loved feet. So, if you watch all of these Nickelodeon shows, you'll notice that there's a lot of feet in them. But, this documentary, like, really opened my eyes on that horrific atrocity towards kids. I mean, Dan Schneider just looked like a normal dude, but he just had like a dark side under him. But Nickelodeon would have definitely like looked at like background checks towards the other people who were pedophiles, and none of this would have happened. So it's a very hard documentary to watch, but I'm sorry if I ruin all y'all's childhood, but be ready. It is a little graphic and extremely heartbreaking. So that was Quiet on Set, The Dark Side of Kids TV. Moving on to a much more fun topic, Abigail. This was my most anticipated movie of April, and it did not disappoint. This movie is my favorite movie of the year so far. This is basically about a group of people who are part of this kidnapping heist, and all they have to do is protect this little girl for 24 hours. Welp, the little girl is a ballerina vampire. Everybody knows that by now. But this movie was so much fun, and I had nothing at all bad to say about it. Easily one of my favorite vampire movies. That was Abigail. And now the portion of the video where y'all ask me, like, what happened to your tone of watching here? Well, I had like a little Disney binge from the 90s. Leave me alone. So, The first movie I watched on that Disney binge from the 90s was Tarzan. So this was released in 1999, and this is obviously the Disney retelling of the famous story. So Tarzan was a baby who got lost in the jungle where his parents died, and a gorilla comes up to save him and raises him to be Tarzan, Man of the Apes, or whatever they call it. So this has like the classic Tarzan story, like me Tarzan, you Jane, and one of my all-time favorite animated movies that Disney has ever put out. The next one I'll talk about is better, but this movie has a banger soundtrack. I mean, all the songs are by Phil Collins, and I just really love this movie. It has comedy, action, tragedy, and romance. So, that was Tarzan. But not to mention, it takes a while for you to get into who the villain is. But it's very obvious once he comes in. And that's Clayton. And his character death is brutal. He just like gets hung from the vines, and then there's like a lightning strike that like shows his silhouette, and that's in a kid's movie. Disney doesn't make them like they used to. So that was Tarzan. The next movie, rewatch of The Lion King, 1994. And I did a review on this for my Film in 94 series, so you get more thoughts in that review. But this is about a pride of lions who are in command from Mufasa. And he is the Lion King, but Scar is his brother, and he's very estranged from him. So Scar has the tenacity to kill off Mufasa, and then banishes Simba into the wild. But Simba comes back and gains his rightful place in the circle of life. I've seen this hundreds upon hundreds of times. There is nothing that'll change my mind about it. It's a perfect animated movie, and it's got a very memorable soundtrack as well. So, if you want more thoughts on it, I have a review on it. So that was The Lion King. Moving on, George of the Jungle. God help me. So, apparently I had like a jungle binge here. But this was a live action Disney retelling of George of the Jungle, which is like a parody of Tarzan. And this stars Brendan Fraser, Leslie Mann, and Thomas Hayden Church. And Thomas Hayden Church and Leslie Mann are part of this jungle expedition, and they're trying to find the white ape, which is George of the Jungle. So Leslie Mann starts developing feelings for George, and he also has a companion, an ape named Ape. I sound like I'm high right now, but I swear to God, this movie exists. But this one was like a guilty pleasure that I watched all the time as a kid. It is very silly, but George comes to like San Francisco and notices city life, and he almost becomes part of society. But anyway, George and Ursula do get married, and they blatantly rip off The Lion King at the end of this movie. Pride Rock and everything. So, this is a really goofy movie, but it is supposed to be goofy because it is a kids' movie. So that was George of the Jungle. Okay, continuing on. Boy Kills World was next, and this was the last new release movie that I saw, and this is also an action revenge thriller that is much weirder than Monkey Man, but more fun to watch. But this stars Bill Skarsgård as like this random dude who gets revenge on the murder of his family. So a shaman takes him in and manipulates him. But the big twist is his family was actually the family that killed his family. So the shaman just tortured him and made him deaf and mute. But he starts like seeing visions of his dead sister, and the only way for him to communicate is to like use this voice from like one of his favorite video games. Very over the top and very gory. And I really enjoyed this movie. Like I said, it's Looney Tunes on acid. Okay, moving on. I have 4 more movies. Again, this is another weird variety here, but that next movie I watched was The Internship, starring Owen Wilson and Vince Vaughn. And this is about like 2 middle-aged dudes who are down on their luck, and they ultimately accept an internship at Google. So the internship takes place over a summer, and it's basically an interview that leads into a possible job. I miss comedies like this, and this was released in 2013, so 11 years ago. That's hard to believe. But it had been a while since I watched this, and it was actually playing on CMT the day that I watched this, so I decided to just go ahead and watch it for myself, and I really did enjoy it. Is it the best of this type of comedy? No, but it is very watchable. So that was The Internship. Again, you're going to ask, what is this guy on? The next one I watched was The Hills Have Eyes 2 from 2007. And this movie came out the year after The Hills Have Eyes remake. So, this is a totally original story that features a group of Army uh, reserves in the desert, and they're on this search and rescue mission. Well, they're being hunted by mine dwelling mutant creatures. Very disturbing stuff, but I do enjoy at some stretch backwoods horror, and I definitely do see this as backwoods horror. And like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Wrong Turn, all those are considered backwoods horror, but you can arguably call this desert horror as well. There are some very gruesome deaths in this movie, and highly enjoyed it. Is it the best? No, but it is a pretty decent sequel to an otherwise great remake. That was The Hills Have Eyes 2. Moving on. Air Bud. Leave me alone. So, this was the next movie I watched, and this was the very first movie that came out in, I want to say, 98. And this is about a family who move into like this new town after the death of the dad. And the oldest son is kind of like an outcast, but he wants to try and like be sociable, so he tries out for the basketball team, and his team doesn't accept him. But he notices like this golden retriever coming into his life, and the kid forms a strong relationship with this dog named Buddy. And turns out Buddy is a great basketball player. I'm not joking. The dog can play basketball. Yeah. But Air Bud was the mascot for this basketball team. And this movie is like a, what am I trying to say? It's a comforting, nostalgic movie for me, because it just has that boy befriending a dog aspect. And I do love those movies. I do love dog movies, but unfortunately I don't have a dog, so this is just one of those movies that I like watched all the time as a kid. So that was Air Bud. And I didn't watch 10 other of these things. God help me. But the last movie I watched in April was a movie that I actually watched tonight. School Spirit. And this was a Hulu original that came out in 2019. And this is about a group of kids who serve Saturday detention, but there is something on the loose hunting them down one by one. This is basically like The Breakfast Club meets a horror movie. So they start out to be like a slasher, of course, and I really did enjoy it. Is it the best thing I've seen? No. But that twist near the end really felt like Psycho. So basically, this dude was part of detention, but he hunted bad kids. So he just killed them one by one. But I really did enjoy this movie, and those are the movies and documentary series that I watched in April. And hope you guys enjoyed. And over the weekend, most likely on Friday, I'm going to go see The Fall Guy, then maybe save Tarot for next Tuesday. So I'll definitely have a review out for The Fall Guy really, really soon. But that's all I got for this video. I'll see you guys in the next one. It's time to get some shut-eye. Adios. Peace.